All right, everybody, welcome to the Creative Finance Collective. I'm Andy Fowler. We've got Sean St. Clair. We also have Drew Jenkins with us. Drew, can you hear us okay?
I can. I can hear you all fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. Good representation here. I know we've got a number of folks out for the holidays. It's a short week. Drew, you got a short week. You're going to take some time off, right?
Oh, you know it. Just about like all my underwriters, we're going to be closed both Thursday and Friday.
Okay. So you're gonna fly out that door Wednesday. We won't see you again till Monday, right?
Well, in truth, I'll probably be in the office, but I'll be the only one keeping a low profile playing catch up.
Yeah, Drew's he's always working. All right. So if you're just now joining us, we're here to talk about creative financing from the legal perspective. So if you have questions, now's your time to ask away. We're not going to sit here and just talk to each other forever. We'll stay on for as long as we have questions that we can address. So make sure to post them. We can talk about real estate or just generally real estate related questions as well. Sean, this is off topic, but I wanted to ask you just because it's so recent in memory, and I want to bring up the presidential debate. I'm not gonna get controversial here, but if you don't know anything about Sean, the one thing you need to know about him is he's a very good golfer. And one thing you need to know about me is I'm not a very good golfer. So I don't really have an appreciation for what a six handicap looks like. But man, it sounds like you're a pretty good golfer with a six handicap. Is that a pretty hard handicap to achieve?
Yes, if you're in the single digits, you are considered a pretty good golfer. Um, you're probably in the top 10% of golfers out there if you're in the single digits for a handicap.
To be any single digit period, you're in the
Any
top.
single, yeah, anywhere from zero to nine, you are up there in the top 10% probably of
All right.
golfers.
So, showing my ignorance, what is a handicap exactly in golf? I'm assuming that's like
Yeah,
over par or something.
well, yeah, so it is over par, but then it's the reverse, right? Or the inverse, I don't know, one of the two. But so if I have an eight handicap, that means I'm expected to shoot eight over par. So then what you do is you actually remove strokes from my score, and that is my net score. So you have your gross score and then you have your net score. So if you're playing in a handicap game, or a net, what we call a net game, then you shoot your number. So if par is 72 and I shoot an 80 and I'm an eight handicap, then I'm deemed to have shot a net even par, a 72. And so the handicaps they start at zero. So that means you're going to shoot par. And then if you're a a one handicap, you take one off. If you're a two handicap, you take two off. But then it also goes into past zero, and that's actually what they call a plus handicap, where you actually add strokes to the score. Which the good news and bad news for me is within the last couple of years, although right now probably not, but within the last couple of years, I had a legitimate like +2 handicap. So they actually added strokes to my score
Oh,
um,
interesting.
at the end of the day. So I never did well in net games because I always wanted to shoot even par. Well, then if you add two to my score, like I'm at, two over, and that doesn't win your net game. So
Yeah. Well, if you were watching the debate and you saw the reaction of the two candidates, that's the reaction Sean would have if I made the claim that I'm a six handicap.
I will tell
And,
you, Donald Trump, like him or not, he is one hell of a golfer, and he
yeah, that
always has
dude lives
been.
and dies golf, right?
Yeah, and he's a legitimate like two handicap, and that's a legitimate. Like some people say that I'm like, a five, and you go out and play with them, and you're like, no, like you're more like a 25. But Donald Trump is a legitimate Now, of course, I've never played with him, but there's been golfers that have played with him, other pro athletes that have played with him who are like, yeah, this guy can golf his ball. Like, he's legit. I'm sorry, but I do not see President Biden being able to take Donald Trump in golf.
What I thought was the funniest was they called each other every name in the book. Well, once you insulted that golf game,
they were mad,
man.
They were mad.
That's going low, baby.
I know. I've seen your swing. I know your swing.
What was hysterical about that when he said that is I'm like, I bet he has studied his swing. Like any golfer like that's like, oh yeah, I watched your swing. I know what it is.
Yeah, well, thanks for explaining that, because I don't have any. I mean, I've golfed once in my life with my uncle, and that has been the extent of my golf game. Although, to segue to more, I guess you would call this traditional creative financing. We closed on a golf course yesterday for one of my clients as part of a reverse 1031 exchange, it being two replacement properties that were acquired first. And one of them happens to be a country club with, part of a golf course. So I might be needing to call you, Sean, for some tips on how to begin my golf game.
Hey, get me out onto the country club. I'll fly back. Let's go play some country club golf.
Yeah, I like it. All right. So, folks, if you're just now joining us, we're not just talking about debate or goofing on golf. We're talking about creative finance. So if you got a question, post it in the chat. We'd love to take your questions about that and go through things. We do have one question. It's a general one, but it says, as an investor, how do I get into creative financing? I think the answer to that, or that discussion, is pretty broad, and I think the answer to that is how do you get into almost any type of niche area of real estate investing? There's a lot to it, and it starts with, I think it starts with having good mentors, probably, and learning how these deals work themselves through. What do you think, Drew, and in the folks that you've worked with? Have you kind of gotten a sense of how they work their way into it? I think it's finding good people who know how to do the deals.
Yeah, I have to think about that one a little bit. So most people don't jump directly into creative financing on the first go around, right? They do a typical assignment or a typical double close, right? Like, you get, you have to walk before you can run. So they get used to, at least in this area, sort of how the market operates, right? Because when you're involved in sort of this wholesaling field, you're dealing with a particular clientele, right? And they have certain quirks about them on average that you don't see in retail. And over time they begin to diversify their offerings. So they may start as a double escrow kind of client, right? And then they'll branch out a little bit and start handling assignments. So they'll come in as an assignment client and then branch out from there. And then sometimes creative financing, they will begin to finance their buyers. So there'll be a middleman and they'll post the funds and they'll hold the mortgage on the flip side. So I mean, and that happens pretty quickly because the dollar amounts, at least out here, are not very high, right? I had one file in Birmingham a few years ago. It drove me nuts, right? Because so the first middleman did a wraparound mortgage with the seller financing, right? Did a mortgage. And then when he sold it to his buyer, they then, did a wraparound that mortgage. And then they sold it to the ultimate buyer. And of course, the whole thing like collapsed like a house of cards 6 months later, because the ultimate buyer was unaware of the mortgage on top of the mortgage. And one of the two middlemen didn't pay upstream, right? And so the ultimate seller then began foreclosure proceedings against, the first wholesaler for failure to pay, because I think even he had not been paid by his buyer, who was a wholesaler and was secured by a mortgage. So that one was all kinds of a mess. So it's having lawyers that know how to structure these, right? and it's not jumping ahead too quickly, right? Like don't try going for things that are too complicated until you can understand them, because if you don't understand them, you can't explain them to your buyer, your seller. And that's kind of what happened on that file. Is the ultimate buyer, thought he was getting a good deal, and he wound up losing his house.
Sean, in your experience with the folks that have done this, how are they getting into it?
So there's multiple ways. So I've had clients who have just fallen into it, who've had, a family member, a neighbor, a friend who, wanted to unload their house. But they liked the cash flow, or they were underwater, or they were break even, and they needed to move. They couldn't pay the mortgage, whatever the case may be. And so they've kind of fallen into it, where they came and said, oh, okay, well, I'll either take over your mortgage, or how about you sell or finance, whatever the case may be. And they just it's just been there, and it happened. And then they do a couple, or they do one, and then they're like, I like this, I know how to do it now. And they go forward, from there. I've had other clients who, have sought it out. And in that case, that's kind of where the mentor comes in, where you are looking for somebody to, shepherd you through, the process. And I think there's a follow-up question, so I'll just jump to it, which is, well, how do you know if your mentor knows what they're doing?
Right.
Well, that's a good question.
Well, especially when you're finding mentors on places like YouTube and stuff, right?
Right, exactly. I think there are some great training programs out there. There's some great mentorships out there, and then there's some other ones that you may want to stay away from. I don't know that there's a right way or wrong way to find, like what training program, what information you need. I would ask the people who are being, mentored, their experience, the mentees, what they have, if it's a training program, talk to people who have gone through the training program. But, when I think of a mentor, I think of somebody who's going to like hold your hand and walk you through a transaction. Well, if you close the transaction successfully and it's a good transaction, then you probably have found a good mentor. If you get in the middle of the transaction, you're like that they can't close it, they don't know how to close it, they struggle, or it doesn't work out, or it turns out to be a bad deal, then you probably don't have a good mentor. So, I would say, work with somebody. Normally the way you work with like a mentor is you have some form of joint venture agreement with them, where you both go on to the purchase contract, or you both go on to the assignment, and you kind of walk your way through, and then you each, divvy up either the property or the profit at the end of the day. Another way is you go and you find the leads, you find the leads yourself. And then you take those leads to an experienced attorney like the ones on this program, and you say, hey, I have this seller who, wants to do this transaction. Can you walk me through it? Can you provide me with, the documents, and, can I get me to the right title company, i.e., like a Drew Jenkins, who can close your transaction. Walk me through this process. And, if an attorney knows what they're doing in this, walk you through it, and they can provide you with all the forms, the disclosures, the documents you have to sign at closing, the whole thing. In Arizona, we're not closing attorneys. We're, we close through, title or escrow agents. And so, I know a number of escrow agents that are experienced in this. We'll go through it, hand you off. They'll take good care of you. They'll walk you through, you close, and you're done. So and I even help clients if they schedule a consult with me. And here I'm trying to sell my services, but I guess the question's out there. If somebody schedules a consult with me, I'll tell them, I'll help them deal structure even. Like if they come and say, okay, here's what the seller's trying to accomplish. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. How can we structure this? What forms, what does it look like? What's the best avenue to go? Here's what their loans are, VA, FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, how do we structure all of this? If we can, and there's a number of factors to determine whether you can or can't. But we can figure out and talk about what that looks like and what the structure is. Are we going to use a lease with an option to purchase? Are we using agreement for sale? Are we going to do a traditional, warranty deed transfer with a performance note and deed of trust? There's a number of things here, right, that we can assist with during that process as attorneys. So that's one way. Just find the transaction and consult with a competent attorney that knows what they're doing.
All right. If you're just now joining us, we're taking creative finance questions. So if you've run into an issue, you have questions, want to see what we think, or want to hear our perspective with regard to our different states that we come at this from, make sure to post it. We'll be on here as long as we're receiving questions. We've got another question, which is kind of a new one, but timely given the election. It says, do you think the election of Biden or Trump will impact creative finance? That's a kind of an interesting question, I think, because maybe, probably, but I think creative finance is a strategy that's driven by the macroeconomic environment that we're currently in, which is driven by interest rates. And theoretically, that's supposed to be, the Federal Reserve's job, which is independent of the presidency. Now, I'm sure the presidency has a lot to say about it, but those are factors that are really around and make creative finance a popular strategy because interest rates are high. So I guess the question is, to what extent could the policies of either a Biden or a Trump change any of that? But if the Federal Reserve decides, look, their job is to try to bring down inflation, right? And the way to bring down inflation in their mind is to slow the economy. And the way you slow the economy is suck excess liquidity out of the system, and you do that by raising interest rates. So how long will that process take? They've been doing it for a while. How long will it continue? Seems to me a lot of that has more to do with it. Now, what's interesting, and I'll ask you guys what you think, I think the housing market, one recent statistics I saw with the housing market is now the new home inventory, so new homes, that inventory is growing and growing quick and now is in excess of older homes, because everybody's sitting on their 3% mortgages and not selling. But everybody's sitting on the sidelines waiting for better interest rates, so they're not buying new homes. So that inventory is growing. I guess you could see a scenario where a new presidential administration or the old presidential administration decides to do something to spur home purchases or whatever else in a manner that, I don't know, brings more buyers and maybe changes prices. I'm not sure. As long as interest rates are high, that affects the creative finance market. I don't know. You guys have any thoughts on that?
I think if they allowed loans to be assumable, right, through some sort of regulation, if they, if all of a sudden the government or you got Fannie or Freddie to be like, you know what, we're going to let loans be assumed, that would really spur the market quickly, right? If they just gave a blanket, given market conditions, we're just going to allow this to occur. I don't know who would do that. I saw that recently. Apparently, Freddie has gotten the green light about to buy those second position down payment home loans I've been seeing. So they're thinking that that's going to help the market, but I don't know if it's going to help it as much as they think it will, because it's such a minimal assistance and it's so bizarre, at least in terms of title, how they've structured these things. But if one of them would say make it assumable, I think that would be huge, because as you said, interest rates are what are or what are keeping us down, because I work with builders, right? And I mean, their costs went up after COVID, right? Labor costs are up. And guess what?
Yeah.
Labor costs are still up. So it's not like they have that much margin in order to lower prices before they themselves wind up upside down.
Right. Sean, what do you think?
So, I mean, we also have to look at, who's likely to, use administrative agencies to try to regulate or change policies that are going to impact housing. So Drew mentioned the whole Freddie buying seconds. Well, that's actually going to create less inventory because that new regulation, or it's not even regulation. I guess, I don't know. Is it regulation with administrative
It's
agency?
not a regulation. It's just so Fannie said we want to do it, and the government said okay. So it's not
Yeah,
actually
but they're
regulation.
insuring.
It's
Yeah,
just
because
a
the government's
rule change. Yeah.
insuring those loans.
Yeah.
If the government said no, we're not going to insure those, then Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac wouldn't do it. But basically, what it is it's cash out seconds that they're allowing them to buy, which, unlike a HELOC, they're going to be like fully amortized with lower interest rates. So it's going to allow people who have those low interest rate first, who don't want to sell but want a bigger house, to basically, pull money out of their house and remodel or do different things around their house that they otherwise couldn't do, so that they can keep that property and not have to sell. Which now you're causing more and more, people not wanting to put their house on the market, and you're decreasing the supply and inventory while increasing, individual debt at higher interest rates, because these seconds aren't like, they're not like 2% loans, right? They're like 6-7%. No, not even 6.
When
7
those
or
homes go on the
8%.
market, they cost more anyway, because now their cost basis is higher. Because again, they're
Right.
also paying for the increased labor
Yeah.
costs.
So, I mean, and that's a Biden administration decision, which a lot of economists have said that's a really bad deal for the housing market, because it's just shrinking your inventory versus, what we need is inventory. I mean, that's what's going to cause, and yeah, we'll see a little bit of dip in prices, but it's probably a needed adjustment. Now, in addition, did you guys see the most recent Supreme Court? Not the immunity one, but the
Chevron.
Chevron
where they
deference.
overturned the Chevron doctrine.
Yeah.
Or Chevron deference. That was huge. I mean,
I think that's the most significant long-term decision from this U.S. Supreme Court calendar. I mean, the implications of that are far-reaching.
And not the implications,
I mean,
the outcome of that is
The
going to
outcome,
be.
yeah, that's true.
right. I mean, and so what had happened was, in the underlying case, I think what was it, the Fish and Game or something like that, or EPA or somebody was like, oh, you have to have this special monitor on your fishing boats at like $700 or $800 a day to make sure you're not like, endangering the habitat or wildlife or whatever. And so all of a sudden now, like these, fishing boats and fishermen, they're like, literally, I'm paying because of some bureaucrat that's not even elected, that I can't even decide whether they should be in office or not, telling me I have to pay $700 or $800 a day to have them on my boat, to an expert to make sure I'm not doing anything to damage the environment or whatever. And the Supreme Court was like, no. And in the process, they stripped these regulatory agencies of significant power. Like, it's big. I mean, now it's going to take a while, because they're not going to just voluntarily like hand over the golden scepter and be like, oh, we can't do anything anymore. And all those regulations that we passed, under the Chevron deference, we're going to give them all up. They're not going to do that. It's going to require court action after court action after court action to strike down all this crappy administrative, regulation that we have. and get back to actually Congress passing laws that get signed by the executive branch and go into effect. But it's major. I think it's major. And I think from a regulatory standpoint, that I do think that's going to help housing, because now in order for the government to come in and regulate like creative finance, like the feds, creative finance, I don't see a regulatory agency having that ability to just, or an administrative agency having the ability to just pass some rule or regulation that affects, housing or creative finance or whatnot. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, anytime the agencies are out of it, I think that's a good thing. I want to kind of play out what Drew was initially saying, because if you wanted to do something big at a federal level, it seems to me you would, and I guess I'm going to ask how you think this would play out if they could even do it, what it would have to look like. But you would make an easy process to assume these old loans. Like you could come in, I'll give you a fair market value for your house, and I'm going to assume your loan. Holy cow. Like the floodgates would open in 2 seconds, wouldn't they? I mean, prices would come down. Like you said, that's probably a good thing. We'd need prices to come down at some point, or whatever. I don't think that's an unhealthy thing. But what would have to, I mean, I know we're not all federal law experts on all this stuff, but what do you think would have to happen to achieve that? Is that even possible?
Yes. So when Fannie Mae agrees to buy the loan, or Freddie Mac, or whichever agency or GSC it is, they could simply state that, because I mean, these are all form loan documents. They could simply state that we will not enforce, the due on sale clause, right? So long as, and again, it's a simple method, so long as the buyer provides an appraisal, and they've got income of some sort, not a full, or I guess it could be a full underwriting, but even partial underwriting, because again, they only care about the cash flow, right? We will not enforce due on sale clause in these circumstances. I don't even think you need the government to make a move on it. I mean, once these things are packaged into securities, if you had like Deutsche Bank as trustee, right? If you had any of them come out and say, hey, any of our portfolio loans, if you pay us X number of dollars, because of course they want to make money on it, and you follow this, and you don't, basically your background won't screw up our actuarial processes on this, on the underlying security, then we're good with it. So I think the reality is it could be a lot easier than we think.
Yeah, I agree. I think if the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans were assumable with conditions, like through a whole underwriting process, and then, mortgage brokers would like that, because I'm sure they would use the mortgage brokers for that process. And
Second bite at the apple.
Yeah, the parties can pay a fee. They underwrite it. They submit it all to the, secured lender, the trustee, and they, sign off on it. They take each one takes their fee, because if most people knew that they could sell their house and there was a high likelihood that they could assume somebody else's low interest rate loan, I think people would be putting their houses on the market and then, looking to assume. And I think it would allow too, because cash buyers are, they have a clear advantage right now in this market. It would allow just, your homeowner who needs financing to be able to go and try to, pull this off.
Yeah. It'd be really interesting in terms of the creative finance market. We really, the creative finance market it wouldn't look the same at that point. I mean,
No.
it's not
Just
just,
be creative anymore.
yeah, that's true. It would just be, assuming the loan under the contract, right? It almost feels like though the situation isn't the same in the Great Recession, but the conventional transaction became the short sale transaction.
Right.
Like this would become the short sale of not that it's a short sale, but it'd be the new transaction for the 2020s. Like we saw the short sale in the early in the 2010 area. For the 2020s, it would be kind of that thing. I wonder whether they would need counsel to kind of work through the assumption and whatever else to know what you're assuming and things like that. All right. Folks, we're discussing creative financing, so if you have questions, make sure to post them. We have another question. Are you seeing more wholesaling of subto deals? Question mark. What are some measures that should be taken for those doing it?
The more I do this, the less I like wholesaling of subject to deals. So first, I don't like the fact that when you're doing the subject to, you're going in and frankly talking with the seller. You're assuring the seller that, hey, this is how it works, and your loan's going to get paid, and you're establishing a rapport with the seller, and the seller is trusting you, and you get the property under contract, and then you bring in some buyer that the seller's never met, the seller doesn't know, the seller doesn't trust, and you're like, oh well, now they're responsible, and I'm just going to grab my assignment fee and move on. I don't like that, and I think the more that this happens, and if sellers start getting burned by an end buyer who purchased it on an assignment, I think you're going to end up with regulation on this that you're not going to like. And so for me, I think for the most part, if you're the original buyer, I would try to close on the subject to, and stay involved in the transaction, and then you could do a disposition of it, and that way when you do your disposition, if the end buyer doesn't perform, you have the ability to walk back in and take the transaction back over, and make sure that the seller's made whole and their loan is being paid, even if you have to pay it until you find another buyer for the property. But I don't like the wholesaling of subject to. I would try to avoid them. If you're going to do them, try to figure out a mechanism, whether that's, and it's complicated, so you want to consult with an attorney, but whether that's through, the buyer being a land trust where you assign the beneficial interest, the buyer being an LLC where you a single asset or single purpose LLC where you actually, sell the membership interest to the end buyer, but then reserve for your right the ability to basically, step back in on both of those and take the transaction back over even after closing if that end buyer doesn't perform. And then of course there's disclosures. I see people wholesaling these subject to deals using a basic assignment that you use for just regular wholesale deals. No. This assignment needs to be much bigger, have way more disclosures in it, because you want to be able to prove that the end buyer knew and was aware of the fact that this was a subject to transaction. I've seen where the end buyer was like, wait a minute, I never got the original contract, or if I did, I didn't get the subject to addendum. I didn't know I was buying subject to, where's my earnest money back, or assignment earnest money? And I think they have a point. I think they have a case. And so you have to make sure that your assignment is designed for the subject to transactions. So there you go. What are some measures? Try to stay in the transaction even post closing, so you can step in and make sure that it's done right and the seller's treated fairly and payments are made as agreed. And then second, make sure you have all the disclosures you need and not just use a basic general assignment that you would use on a normal wholesale transaction.
Yeah, no, I agree. Too many people, just even in typical wholesale or assignment deals, right? They think it's easy money, it's quick, hit it and move on, and they cut a lot of corners. And Sean is right. There's so many moving parts and there's so much ongoing maintenance to a subject to deal that, it seems really dangerous to just make it, treat it as a wholesale and, pawn the whole thing off to someone else. Because as Andy was saying, you're involved with one party and they think they're involved with you, and then all of a sudden, you're now two people removed from the person that the seller thought they were dealing with. And if it's not structured right, they don't even realize, right, that it's that far down for the buyer doesn't realize. I mean, my Alabama file a subject to because the seller was selling out. So first buyer was buying for 15,000, got it seller finance, and they financed it for 20. So I wasn't involved in the transaction, but they turned around and sold it to someone else who was supposed to pay them. That ultimate buyer had been paying right up the chain. I don't know where the chain got broke, but the seller wasn't getting theirs. And so they began foreclosure proceedings against someone 1, 2, 3 levels removed that they weren't even considered as part of our transaction. And I mean, that's an easy way to cause lawsuits. And I guarantee you the cost of that's going to cost you more than whatever you made in these deals.
Right.
Yeah. Good stuff, guys. So we've hit the end of our questions here. We had some good ones. Let's see if we've got anything else. That's about all of them. So, folks, true to our word, we're here for as long as we get questions. We appreciate you staying with us and interacting with us. Always a good time. With that, guys, because we're out, we'll go ahead and call it. Thanks for being with us, Drew. It's good to see you.
Seeing
We'll
y'all
see you
been
again on the next
very
one.
busy lately, which is a good thing.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah. We'll see y'all later. Have a happy or a safe 4th of July, I guess is the better.
Yeah. Good.